Last time, we examined every serious theory that has been proposed to explain what happened on Dead Mountain on the night of February 1st, 1959. The avalanche theory, which explains the injuries but cannot explain the tent still standing 25 days later. The infrasound theory, which explains the panic but cannot explain the injuries or the missing eyes or the missing tongue. The military weapons theory, which explains the radiation but cannot be proven because the relevant files remain classified. And the conclusion that every serious researcher eventually arrives at. We do not know. This is episode 4, the final episode. This is not the episode where everything is explained. I want to be honest with you about that from the beginning, because the Dyatlov Pass incident is not a story with a clean ending. It is not a mystery that was solved and then forgotten. It is a story about 9 people who died in a way that has not been fully explained in 65 years, and about what happens to the people who loved them when there is no answer to hold on to. This is the episode about what happened after, about Yuri Yudin who turned back, about the families who waited, about the search party members who found the bodies and spent the rest of their lives trying to understand what they had seen, about the mountain that has carried the story for 65 years, and about what we owe to 9 people who went to a mountain in 1959 and did not come home. This is the truth of the Dyatlov Pass. Not the answer to what happened, but the truth of what it means and who it happened to. I want to tell you about Yuri Yudin. He was the 10th member of the Dyatlov group, the one who turned back. He had been having problems with his knee and his joints from the beginning of the trek. The cold was making it worse. The terrain was difficult. On the 4th day out from Vizhai, he made the decision that he could not continue. He said goodbye to his friends. He shook hands with each of them. Igor Dyatlov last. He turned around and walked back toward the inhabited world. He was 21 years old. He spent the rest of his life, 53 more years, wishing he understood why he was alive and they were not. When the news reached him that the search party had found the tent empty, that the footprints led away into the cold without boots, he knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. He did not know what. Nobody knew what, but he knew. He joined the search effort when he could. He was there when some of the bodies were recovered. He identified personal belongings. He sat with the families who were waiting for news. He was the only person who had been with all 9 of them in those last days before the mountain. The last person alive who had seen them all living and whole and in good spirits, writing jokes in their camp newspaper, setting up tents in the snow, living. For 53 years he carried that. Reporters asked him regularly whether he felt guilty for surviving. He always rejected the premise of the question. He had not survived by any decision of his own. He had turned back because his knee would not carry him further. There was no heroism in it and no cowardice. There was only a bad joint and a decision that turned out to be the difference between living and not. But he thought about them every day. For 53 years, he thought about them. He became one of the most dedicated advocates for a full investigation of what had happened. He worked with the Dyatlov Foundation. He gave interviews. He pushed the Russian government to reopen the case. He read every document that became available as the Soviet archives slowly declassified. He visited the pass that had been named after his friend. He stood on the slope of Dead Mountain and looked at the place where the tent had been, and tried to understand. Yuri Yudin died on April 27, 2013. He was 75 years old. He died without a satisfying explanation for what had happened to the 8 people he had said goodbye to on a winter morning in 1959. He was buried near his hometown in the Ural region, not far from the mountain that had taken his friends, and that had never given them back. I want to tell you about the families, because this is something that accounts of the Dyatlov Pass incident often skip past. They focus on the mystery, on the theories, on the evidence and the investigation and the classified files. And they forget that behind every piece of evidence, behind every body and every autopsy report and every classified document, there were families. There were mothers who waited for telegrams that did not come, fathers who received the news that would divide their lives into before and after, brothers and sisters who went on living while their siblings did not. Igor Dyatlov's family had known he was an exceptional young man from the beginning. His passion for hiking was something they understood and supported. His mother had received his last letter, the letter he had written 4 days before departure, telling her the ship was in beautiful trim and the crew was quietly capable. Words that she read afterward with a knowledge he could never have shared. Lyudmila Dubinina's family. Her parents had supported her hiking because she loved it so completely, because she was the kind of person who did everything completely, who committed absolutely to whatever she chose to do. They had known she was tough, had seen her toughness in action many times, but tough was not the same as invulnerable. And on the mountain in February 1959 something had found the limit of what even Lyudmila Dubinina's exceptional toughness could withstand. Semyon Zolotaryov's family faced a particular additional grief. He was the oldest, the one who had already survived so much, the Second World War veteran who had come through things that should have killed him and had not. His family had perhaps believed that a man who had survived what he had survived was somehow protected, that the universe had already made its decision about him, and it was to let him live. Dead Mountain had no interest in what the universe had previously decided. The families were not given satisfying answers. They were given the conclusion that the Soviet investigators had issued, a compelling natural force, and they were left with that. A compelling natural force. Try explaining to a mother that her child was killed by a compelling natural force. Try sitting with a father who wants to know what happened to his son, and telling him that the government has concluded it was a compelling natural force and sealed the files. The families deserved better. They deserved answers. They deserved truth. They deserved the specific, detailed, honest account of what had happened to the people they loved. Instead, they got a phrase, a bureaucratic nothing of a phrase, that told them everything and nothing simultaneously. Some of the families spent years pursuing answers through whatever channels were available to them, writing letters, making requests for information, pushing as hard as ordinary citizens could push against a government that had decided the matter was closed. Most of them died without satisfying answers. Their children, the grandchildren of the Dyatlov group, are still asking questions. The mystery did not end with the people who lived it. It was passed down, generation to generation, a wound that never fully closed because the thing that caused it was never fully explained. I want to tell you about the mountain, about what Dead Mountain looks like today, about what it means to stand on the slope where 9 people camped on the last night of their lives. The Dyatlov Pass, the specific mountain pass where the group established their final camp, was officially renamed in memory of Igor Dyatlov in 1959. It was a gesture, an acknowledgement that something significant had happened here, that the name of the person who had led the group deserved to be attached to the place where that group had met its end. For many years, the pass was visited only occasionally, by researchers, by journalists, by the occasional hiker who wanted to see the place for themselves. In recent years, that has changed. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become one of the most widely known unsolved mysteries in the world. Books have been written, documentaries have been produced, films have been made. The case has been discussed and debated and theorized about in dozens of languages on every continent. And people go there now, to stand on the slope and look at the treeline below and try to understand, to feel the cold and the wind and the isolation and try to imagine what 9 people felt on a night in February 1959 when something drove them from their tent. The Dyatlov Foundation in Ekaterinburg has worked for decades to keep the memory of the 9 hikers alive, to ensure they are remembered not as victims of a mystery, not as case study subjects, but as the specific human beings they were. Igor, who planned everything meticulously, Zina, who made hard things feel possible, Ludmila, who skied 50 miles after being shot because she did not want to slow her group down, Rustam, who was quietly dependable, Yuri Krivonischenko, who made people laugh when they needed it, Yuri Doroshenko, who shared his sleeping bag with his best friend, Sasha Kolevatov, who did his most important work without seeking credit, Kolya Thibault-Brignol, whose unusual name stood out in a country of unusual names, and Semyon Zolotaryov, who had survived a world war and come back to find that winter mountains were where he wanted to spend his time. 9 people. Not a mystery. 9 people. I want to tell you what I believe happened on Dead Mountain, not what can be proven, not what the evidence definitively establishes. What I believe. After 65 years of reading everything available, after speaking to every witness who would speak, after walking that mountain myself in February conditions, after sitting with every theory and measuring it against every piece of evidence, I believe something happened on that slope in the early hours of February 2nd, 1959 that created a sudden and overwhelming threat that 9 experienced people all perceived simultaneously. What that threat was, I cannot say with certainty. I believe the most likely trigger was some combination of natural forces. A snow event of some kind, perhaps not a full avalanche but something, a shifting of the snow above the tent, combined perhaps with other factors. The infrasound that some researchers have proposed could have amplified a smaller physical threat into something that felt existential. That turned a frightening but survivable situation into something that felt like the mountain itself was trying to kill them. 9 people with years of training and experience and rational judgment all reacted the same way simultaneously, cut their way out, left everything, ran. That level of synchronized panic response from 9 experienced people suggests something that overwhelmed their training, something that bypassed their judgment, something that made running feel like the only option. I believe they ran to the treeline and tried to survive. I believe some of them tried to go back and could not. I believe the 4 in the ravine built their shelter and tried to keep each other alive for as long as they could. And I believe the injuries on the 4 in the ravine, the fractured skulls and the crushed chests and the missing eyes and the missing tongue, were caused by the weight and movement of snow in the ravine, snow falling on them as they lay in their shelter, snow moving in ways that transmitted force without concentrating it at the surface, which would explain injuries of enormous force with no external marks. And the tongue, the missing eyes, these I believe were caused by something that happened after death, by the movement of water in the spring thaw, by the small animals and the natural processes of decomposition that proceed differently under snow and in running water than they do in other conditions, by the particular and unforgiving way that nature treats what it has buried. This is not a satisfying explanation. I know that it does not carry the weight of proof, but it is what I believe after 65 years. And it is the most honest thing I can offer, because the honest answer to what happened on Dead Mountain is not a dramatic revelation. It is not a government conspiracy or a Yeti or an alien encounter. It is this: 9 exceptional people went to a mountain in winter. Something frightened them in the night. They ran from it without what they needed to survive. And the mountain that they had come to love and challenge killed them. The same way mountains have been killing people who love and challenge them since the beginning of human history. Except for the radiation, except for the injuries that some experts still cannot fully account for, except for the classified files that the Russian government sealed and has not fully opened in 65 years. Except for those things, which is why after 65 years, the most honest answer remains: we do not fully know. I want to end this series by telling you what happened to the 9 hikers after After the mountain, after the investigation, after the classified files and the compelling natural force and the decades of theories, what happened to them after? They were buried in Sverdlovsk, 5 of them together in the Mikhailovskoye cemetery, 4 in other locations. There were funerals. There were people who came to say goodbye. There were speeches and flowers and the particular heaviness of grief that comes when the people who have died were young and vital and had so much ahead of them. Yuri Kuntsevich was 12 years old. He attended 5 of the funerals. He stood at gravesides and watched coffins lowered into the February ground and did not understand what he was seeing. He understood later. He spent his life understanding it. He became the head of the Dyatlov Foundation because understanding it was not enough, because he needed to do something with what he understood. The graves became places of pilgrimage. People left flowers. People left photographs. People left hiking equipment and small tokens and the particular offerings that people bring to the graves of those who died doing something they loved. The mountain pass that carries Igor Dyatlov's name has a memorial plaque now. On the slope where the tent was pitched, where 9 sets of footprints walked away into the darkness, people go there and stand at that plaque and read the names: Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov, Zinaida Alexeyevna Kolmogorova, Ludmila Alexandrovna Dubinina, Rustam Vladimirovich Slobodin, Yuri Alexeyevich Krivonischenko, Yuri Nikolaevich Doroshenko, Alexander Sergeyevich Kolevatov, Nikolai Vladimirovich Thibault-Brignol, Semyon Alexeyevich Zolotaryov. 9 names, on a mountain called Dead Mountain, in the place where they camped on the last night of their lives. Standing there, in the cold, looking at those 9 names, you understand something that all the theories and all the investigations and all the 65 years of trying to explain it cannot give you. You understand that this happened, that these 9 people were real, that they stood on this exact slope and looked out at this exact landscape and felt the cold that you are feeling and heard the wind that you are hearing. And that something happened here that we cannot fully explain, and that the not fully explaining is part of what we owe them. Because the moment we are completely satisfied with any explanation, the moment we close the book and say, yes, this is what happened and it is resolved, we stop looking, we stop asking, and 9 people who deserved the truth deserve to still have someone looking, still have someone asking, still have someone standing on Dead Mountain in February with their names in hand and the cold pressing in from every direction and the absolute refusal to be satisfied with an answer that does not account for everything. This has been the Dyatlov Pass, the true story of 9 Soviet hikers who went to a mountain in February 1959 and did not come home. If this story stayed with you, if the names stayed with you, if you find yourself thinking about Ludmila, who skied 50 miles after being shot, and Semyon, who survived a world war, and Igor, who wrote meticulous camp newspapers, and Yuri Yudin, who turned back and spent 53 years wishing he understood why, then it has done what it was meant to do. This has been Gray Archive Tales. Subscribe and stay in the shadows. We will be here, waiting, the way the mountain waits, the way it has always waited. Patient, and cold, and full of things it has not told us yet.